Pedro Pinochet stopped being in power in like 90, something like that.
and went into a military dictatorship that lasted about 17 years.
Which the
So it
U.S.
was like,
backed, right? When the
yeah,
U.S. backed them.
yeah.
And
The yeah. Do you really want to get into all that?
Hello, once again from the capitalist dystopia of the United Kingdom. And today we're talking about someone very wholesome, almost as wholesome as Wholesome Keanu. Today we are talking about Pedro Pascal. Now, I am being a bit sarcastic, but Pedro Pascal does actually seem like a nice dude generally. So it's pretty common knowledge that Pedro Pascal's family fled Chile. They fled the Pinochet dictatorship because they were socialist or Marxist, and we know he has been a strong supporter of like more progressive causes. But why this video was fun to research is I didn't know he used to be like really active on Twitter ages ago, and that even meant occasionally he'd get into fights with anti-SJW YouTubers because he would say stuff about Trump supporters. So that's pretty funny. So today what I wanted to do is just like look through the politics of Pedro Pascal. Don't worry, he is pretty cool, like even as someone who's a communist. He doesn't seem like the biggest lib, but I think a lot of times people who just live in America become libs and they say more like libby stuff. And I don't really have much of a problem with Pedro for saying this stuff, but I do think it's quite interesting. So I wanted to like look at his family history, look at his life, then look at some of his politics, and then just talk about his politics, his support for Boric in Chile, and we saw him support him during the election. He has a trans sister as well, so he's been really supportive of LGBT rights as a whole, and like I said, not afraid to get down and dirty with anti-SJW nerd YouTubers, and I guess that's something me and Pedro have in common. I guess we're really similar. We should actually probably be friends, I think. But anyway, all of that coming up for you today. Please like the video, and in the comments, who do you think is a celebrity with like the best politics? Also consider following me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter and on Instagram. Instagram is where I posted about all my travels around Asia, and that is all archived in the highlight reels on my profile page, so go check that out. I'm also trying to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and for becoming a patron, you get access to the Discord server, and you get access to my Nintendo Switch friend code, and there is some exclusive videos from my travels. We are going to upload more content like that. If you care about any of that and want to show support, go check out the Patreon page. Also, down in the description, check out all the links, and also my subreddit and also my second channel. So the reason I actually have made this video today is because although I knew a lot about Pedro Pascal, I saw this clip kind of going semi-viral on Twitter, and the Southpaw Pod posted, I think it's like a community thing they did during the first lockdown, and here's Pedro Pascal talking with some of the cast, and they're talking about the coup in Chile, and it's just interesting, so I thought I'd play it for you.
Pedro Pinochet stopped being in power in like 90, something like that, or late 80s. He died in. I should have looked this up, but I think it was right around there.
He died recently.
2000.
He was arrested. He was arrested in Europe.
So I think power stopped in 1990. I think
it was in '73 when they bombed Allende's the presidential palace and went into a military dictatorship that lasted about 17 years.
Which the U.S. backed, right? When
yeah.
The U.S. backed them.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Do you really want to get into all that?
No, I mean, when you think about Chile's history, it's like they still, like, the numbers are like, oh, 9,000 people were killed. And they're like, no, it's probably around 30,000. And then another, and these are all people that disappeared and were being flown over the ocean and pushed out of planes. It was insane, the government.
I think it's funny in the clip that Pedro doesn't want to get into how the CIA like helped orchestrate the coup that deposed the socialist president of Chile, Salvador Allende, but what I also find interesting is that seems to be kind of like what Pedro Pascal is about, in that he will be quite explicit sometimes, but I think as an actor, everyone always thinks about like how things will come across, so maybe he thinks if he starts talking about how much America was involved in destroying the country he was born in, actually caused him to flee the country he was born in, then maybe he's thinking about like the headlines, maybe he's thinking about how this will be turned into a story. Although I would say a lot of the media would probably give him a pass, considering he like actively campaigned for Boric to become the new leader of Chile, and like no one really seemed to care too much because they don't know anything about the politics of that country. So I don't know. That is just in my head. I'm thinking like he's probably the one who doesn't want to say anything. He's seeing tomorrow's headlines already. But on that, we're talking about Pinochet, we're talking about Allende, we're talking about all this stuff. So just going to run down his like family history and run down like his like childhood fleeing from the coup. So The Last of Us star Pedro Pascal and his family have a history of resistance by Ian Paul. So the Chilean American actor is known for his roles in TV series such as Narcos, Game of Thrones, and The Last of Us. And he was born on April 2nd, 1975 in Santiago, Chile, and raised in the US. His parents were political activists during the Pinochet regime in Chile, the child psychologist Veronica Pascal Urita, and fertility doctor Jose Balmaceda Riera. Pascal's family were heavily involved in the political landscape of Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship, and as a result, they had close connections with various political figures, including former Chilean President Salvador Allende. Pascal's mother was actually the cousin of the president's nephew, Andreas Pascal Allende, and in order to topple the military dictatorship, Andreas served as an early leader of the urban guerrilla movement known as the Movement of the Revolutionary Left. Pascal claims that his parents were ardent supporters of Allende and prominent members of the anti-Pinochet guerrilla organizations. His family sought sanctuary in the Venezuelan embassy in Santiago 9 months after his birth as a result, and was subsequently given political asylum in Denmark. So you can already kind of imagine how that will form your whole political beliefs. Like, your parents were socialists who supported the socialist president who was overthrown by the military with the help of the CIA. And the CIA couldn't let the whole of Latin America go communist. They were scared about Cuban influence. Of course, how much business opportunities did they see in Chile as well? And of course, my own country supported the coup too. And where did Pinochet end up after the dictatorship? He ended up in England. But in 2017, there was an article called My Cousin Pedro Pascal, and it was just from the perspective of an older cousin he had. And this is what he writes about Pedro. So I've translated this on Google. So if it kind of doesn't make sense, that's because it's a bad translation. So talk about the first memory that I had of Pedro. I was 9 years old at his baptism or something. Pedro's parents were not at his baptism. My uncle, Jose Balmaceda, my mother's only male brother, and his wife, Veronica Pascal, were at the Venezuelan embassy. Pepe, as we said to my uncle, was at the time a young 27-year-old doctor, that's Pedro's dad. Sometime before, they had hidden Andreas Pascal Allende, that's the mother's cousin, who was also the nephew of the president. As in most Chilean families, in mind there were supporters of both sides, for and against Pinochet. Trying to help Pedro's parents, my dad called a relative who held a high position in the army, tell the kids to take an asylum because I can't guarantee their lives, or that nothing happens to Veronica, was his response. She was 22 years old. Then the journey of my uncles began, and with them that of my cousin, Jose Pedro Balmaceda Pascal. Pepe and Veronica had to start living secretly in different houses. The second memory I have of Pedro is when I accompanied my parents, who took him and his sister in their arms, to stand out on the sidewalk in front of the Venezuelan embassy so that his parents could see them through the window. My uncles left the Venezuelan embassy for the airport in January 1976. Pedro was 9 months old and obviously doesn't remember anything. I just remember that they didn't let me go. Pedro couldn't recall the image, which I couldn't see, of his grandfather, Luis Pascal Vigil, a very prominent lawyer, singing the national anthem. So Pedro himself, talking about this to the press and about his experience and how that informed his politics, he said, I believe that with the influence of my family, when something is inside your blood, within your experience and your heart, it is part of my character. I do it because it is what I feel in my heart, but it also reflects the need for people who are very close to me and my heart is where their hearts are. It's part of my experience, it's the way I was raised, and that's how the blood goes in my heart. I would love to have better Spanish to be able to talk about these things. If I didn't get nervous, I could explain myself better. At 8 years old, my parents were left on a list of forgiven, so the whole family had the opportunity to return to Chile. It was a very big meeting for my mum and dad. I was younger, about 4 years old. They sent us back to Chile for a while and we were with family. All my life has been with my Chilean family and living in different parts of the US. It's like the Latin world and the culture of North America has been a big part of my experience. So I identify myself as a foreigner who is at home anywhere he is. So considering the brutality of the Pinochet regime, his parents are very lucky, especially if they did help the mother's cousin escape arrest when he was the nephew of the overthrown president, and he was also part of a guerrilla movement. So clearly they were very brave in helping socialist movements in Chile itself. And although he couldn't remember it, like if you grow up in that environment, you're of course going to probably share those values. And I think if you're born into a family who has any of that, you kind of look to it for inspiration. I spoke about it a lot in loads of videos, but I'm born into an Irish family, even though I've been born and raised in England. And in my family in the past, there's been lots of people who were in like the Irish Republican Brotherhood and Army. The most famous one organised the Easter Rising, Sean MacDiarmada, or Sean McDermott in a more English way. And if you read about his life, it's like really inspirational. He had polio, but he still organised the start of the end of British rule in what is now the Republic of Ireland, and he was actually killed for it as well. So you kind of think about that, and you think about that's who you want to more aspire to be than other members of your family. But if it's your like actual parents who are like these crazy brave people who are fighting for good in the face of like terrible odds and this terrible American-backed dictatorship, then that is going to have like a massive influence on you. And thankfully, even though I don't think he wants to talk about like how America destroyed Chile, it's nice that he actually started campaigning for Boric, who became another socialist leader of Chile. And what happened is basically, I think what happened is Pedro Pascal wore a shirt with Boric's logo on it. And then Boric posted on his Instagram of him wearing the shirt with Pedro Pascal wearing his logo. And then Pedro Pascal posted another one of him wearing the shirt of Boric wearing the shirt of Pedro Pascal wearing a shirt of Boric. And Pedro Pascal was pretty vocal about telling people to vote for Boric. And he said stuff like this: "Hello, I'm Pedro Pascal, and I want to invite you to vote for a leader committed to democracy and to continue moving forward with all my heart. December 19th, vote 1, vote for Gabriel Boric." And then at the end of last year, they actually met up, I think for the first time in New York. So Pedro Pascal and President Boric starred in a long-awaited meeting in New York. So actor Pedro Pascal finally met President Gabriel Boric and sealed the long-awaited meeting with an emotional hug in New York. In the midst of a tribute to the 50th anniversary of President Salvador Allende's speech at the UN, President Gabriel Boric had one of the guests at the events be the actor Pedro Pascal. In addition to Pascal was the president of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, who is a socialist as well. They listened to Senator Isabel Allende, the daughter of the former President Allende. Once the ceremony was over, Pascal approached Boric to greet him, and then you see them embracing pretty nicely here, and then there's a picture of them all in front of like a portrait of Salvador Allende. So what I like about Pedro Pascal so much is that although Allende had his problems and stuff, he like fully embraces the socialism. And it's pretty clear if you had a conversation with him, like honestly, which you probably would never have because he's a celebrity, he would probably express like socialist politics, just like his parents, just like the people he's meeting there, just like Allende and stuff. And Allende was like strongly anti-capitalist as well. It's not like a liberal politician. So if you are supporting him, your parents are supporting him, they are socialists too. So I just think it's nice in that way. Although it seems like people don't care because it is all framed as like Latin American politics and stuff, it's pretty nice that he was happy to actually endorse a socialist candidate, because what you often see with a lot of Latin American actors in America is that they either don't speak about politics in their home countries, or they are just crazy reactionaries. Like you see this so much with Cubans especially. I know it's always been a meme, like how crazy right-wing like Cubans in America are. So Pedro Pascal is refreshing when you see so much of that in Hollywood, especially the anti-Cuban stuff. Now, I want to talk about him battling like nerd reactionaries online, but I think we have to talk about his social media, because he recently deleted his Twitter And his Twitter was really funny, especially going back further. I also checked out his Instagram. So on his Instagram, he posts stuff. This was about Chile trying to change their constitution, which sadly lost the vote. And then he's posting about Pride Month. He was posting like when Joe Biden won the election, like a good lib. And he's posting like more revolutionary stuff. Has like James Baldwin, has like Black Trans Lives Matter with Defund the Police on a little duck, Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street. Has something talking about like reparations for African Americans. But Pedro, what are you doing here? Why are you with this CIA agent? This guy's dad probably orchestrated the coup in Chile. For some reason, he's standing with Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg 2020. Pedro, I really hope you did not endorse Pete Buttigieg for president. Like I said, you're literally endorsing someone who probably is still in the CIA. But then he's promoting like AOC as well. And then he was calling Donald Trump supporters basically Germans from the 1930s and 40s. But honestly, his Twitter was pretty funny as well. This made me laugh because I didn't find this out until later on researching this video, like just an hour or so ago. Him tweeting at like people involved with geeks and gamers is just absolutely hilarious. So there's an article on a site called Bounding Into Comics. Now, Bounding Into Comics is basically an anti-SJW website. So you know how we cover anti-SJW nerd channels. This is the written format of that. So the Mandalorian and Wonder Woman actor Pedro Pascal compares Donald Trump voters to 1930s Germans, posting the meme I just showed you to his Instagram page. And then he posted another one, losers in 1865, losers in 1945, and losers in 2020. So people were calling out him more. And then Ryan Kinnell, who is like Geeks and Gamers alum, he made a whole video about this. And he said in this article, the important part here is that you have a Lucasfilm actor not simply saying, oh, well, this is my opinion, whatever. You have a Lucasfilm actor who is going out of his way to alienate, to insult, and to deride half of your audience. And honestly, I can't imagine it. This would not have happened in George Lucas's era. There is no way he would have allowed something like this. In response to the tweet, Pascal stated, oh wow, check it out, people, with loads and loads of emojis and rainbows and stuff. In fact, Pascal would actually double down his rhetoric that over 70 million Americans who voted for President Trump are the equivalent of fascists. He wrote on Twitter, without restating the obvious, you feel me, about the MAGA hats rights. Back in March 2019, Pascal would declare his support for socialism as he simply tweeted, socialism, after someone saying, I think Pedro Pascal would have a good day if everyone pissed on him, and socialism. When shown evidence of the devastation of socialism in Venezuela, Pascal would rebuke it, writing, see, now, I would call those pictures the traumatic effects of corruption and deceit, not socialism. This is socialism. And then he shared a picture of the flags of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And then this led to Donald Trump Jr. wanting Pedro Pascal fired from The Mandalorian. Same movie as Gina Carano. Well, it's not a movie. Same analogy, though the pic has the wrong date. I'm told it was 2010 under Obama and Biden. So does Disney discriminate against women for doing what their male actors do? Or is it only discrimination against conservatives? So a couple of things to address there. Ryan Kinnell was saying to Pedro Pascal, would George Lucas allow left-wing politics? Would he allow like comparisons of Donald Trump to historical figures in Germany? I think George Lucas would be very much okay with that. Do you know why? Because Darth Vader and Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith are based on Dick Cheney and George Bush. And the whole of that film is basically talking about the politics of the Bush era. And then if we even go back to the original Star Wars, the rebels are inspired by Vietnamese communists who won the Vietnam War against America and the American puppet government of South Vietnam, right? And also George Lucas has said positive things about the Soviet film industry because it didn't have to kind of fit into a narrow view of consumerism and capitalism. I think George Lucas would be pretty okay with socialism, to be honest, because he has lots of left-wing messaging in his films. He said a lot of left-wing stuff throughout his life. So this revisionist history that George Lucas would somehow hate, like left-wing politics or something, despite the fact that his Star Wars films were far more political than anything that's come out since, and they were also far more left-wing, and they were actually commenting on like contemporary US politics. Like, seriously, do you think he'd hate Pedro Pascal? And then, of course, when someone was saying bad things about socialism, Pedro Pascal was saying, you know, Scandinavian socialism, that's like real socialism, because someone was showing him Venezuela, which does have like corruption and stuff. That's inarguable. And honestly, I don't care if Pedro Pascal thinks Scandinavian countries are socialist, because to most of us, we'd rather live in those countries. I'm not going to say that a lot of these countries don't structure their society at like a more baseline level better than the UK. Of course they do. They have more socialist policies implemented thanks to historically really strong union movements. Of course, I think, you know, Sweden, a lot of these countries going more far right and trying to kind of destroy these social safety nets is something to talk about. And I've actually made a whole video about how Scandinavian socialism is not a model that most countries should seek to replicate, mainly because the wealth that these countries have accumulated is through them participating in global capitalism, mainly the extraction of wealth from the global south by the global north, because these countries are completely in bed with the United States and the United States global agenda. You have countries like Norway and Denmark, which go along with basically every US war, and oftentimes they do that to access natural resources. That's what Norway did in Libya. Denmark has basically fought in every single US war recently. And then Sweden, although doesn't participate in the wars, does have cozy connections because they're a massive arms seller, which sells to like US clients as well, like Saudi Arabia, for example. So the only reason these countries are so wealthy is because they also participate in the general global capitalist exploitation. And whether or not you agree with everything they do, other socialist countries like Cuba, for example, obviously do not have a model that relies on the extraction of wealth from even poorer countries. In fact, Cuba often helps these poorer countries a lot more than any of these countries do. But if you're more like a lib American socialist and you're saying, well, all these countries are better than America and that's socialism, I honestly don't really care, because these countries are all better than America. They're all better than the UK for socialist policies and tackling poverty and having just nicer societies and everything. You can't downplay the problems of like xenophobia, racism, and how they've actually accumulated all their wealth. But yeah, generally it seems like Pedro Pascal is pretty left-leaning and he has a positive view of socialism. So maybe, Pedro, we can sit down and I can convince you like real socialism is actually good, not like social democracy in Scandinavia, which is better than a lot of capitalist countries, but it isn't like the be-all and end-all. Now, Pedro Pascal is also pretty based because he is a really strong supporter of LGBT rights, and I'm sure he probably was anyway because he's been so accepting of this, but he actually has a transgender sister. So read an article from them by Frankie Della Cretas. So Pedro Pascal celebrates his sister Lux coming out as transgender. Pedro Pascal is showing people how it's done when it comes to being a supportive family member. The Mandalorian star took to social media on Tuesday to celebrate his sister Lux coming out as a transgender woman. Lux appears on the February cover of Ya magazine, a Spanish-language publication, under the headline The Transition of Lux Pascal. In the accompanying feature, Lux discusses her transition publicly for the first time. The 28-year-old actress previously identified as non-binary, but over time she says she came to understand herself as a woman. Moving through the world as a woman is much more simple for me, but I still advocate for non-binary identities to have a space in society. As for Pascal, he is very clearly a proud older brother. He posted a photo of Lux's cover on Instagram with the caption, Mi hermana, mi corazón, nuestra Lux, which translates to my sister, my heart, our Lux. In the Yeah feature, Lux describes her brother as an important part of her transition. Lux recalls coming out to Pascal over FaceTime and him asking how she felt. When Lux told her brother she was happy, he replied, "Perfect, this is incredible." He is also an artist and has served as a guide for me, she said. He was one of the first people to give me the tools that started shaping my identity. The entire Pascal family has supported Lux, who says she started hormone replacement therapy in July. My transition has been something that's very natural for everyone in my family. It's almost something that they expected to happen. In September 2020, Pascal's vocal advocacy for the trans community was evident after his Mandalorian co-star Gina Carano changed her Twitter name to include Beep Bop Boop, mocking the concept of pronouns. While she said the move had zero to do with mocking trans people, she took the words of her profile after Pascal explained the significance of adding pronouns to a social media bio. So Pascal spoke in an interview about this as well, so I wouldn't want to speak on her behalf, but she is and has always been one of the most powerful people and personalities I've ever known. My protective side is lethal, but I need her more than she needs me. Obviously, in an ideal world, most people are super supportive of a family member coming out as gay or trans, but it's nice because Pedro Pascal is a fair bit older as well. I think he's like 48 years old or something now. And I'm not saying everyone that age is terrible when it comes to this stuff, but it does feel like, obviously, the older you are, the less accepting you are of this stuff, where younger generations now are very, very accepting of this stuff. And it's just really nice to see that he comes from a family who have good politics and social values, and then he just carries that on even, like, 40-something years after he left the environment of socialist Chile as well. And it just seems like this guy is really nice. I just hope it's not too nice. I hope we don't hear something terrible about him, because it's really hard not to like him, because he gives really great performances in like Narcos, especially as Joel in The Last of Us. I really liked him. And then, of course, in The Mandalorian as well, he has loads of nerd cred and supports socialism to a degree, supports socialism in Chile, and has this like more socialist tradition in his family. And he just seems like a generally nice guy in Hollywood who you actually want to root for. I don't know about you, but a lot of the time when I think about actors I like, it always comes out later that, oh, they said something terrible, or they have really weird politics, or they're Jordan Peterson fans, or, they have some sort of weird thing that really turns you off them. Like recently I remembered that I was blocked by Shannon Woodward from The Last of Us and Westworld on Twitter because she was saying stuff about Bernie Sanders. And I'm not saying like she was my favorite actress, but it's kind of disappointing when it's like, oh, I like you from The Last of Us, and now you're saying bad things about like Bernie Sanders. I can of course divorce my like political views from like my respect for an actor's performance, but it is nice when you start liking an actor or celebrity and then you find out they actually are like good people as well, and they're good people with good politics, and that seems to be what Pedro Pascal is. I really just hope I'm not taking an L in like 5 years time. People find this video and be like, oh, how wrong you were. But I feel like I won't be wrong with this one. I feel like there isn't going to be something that comes out that Pedro Pascal was just, the worst or is a terrible guy. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video learning about like the politics and like social views of Pedro Pascal. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.